All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective, and that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure to pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity. But to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
No matter how hard of a conversation you're going to have with someone, if they feel you're being honest with them, if they feel you treated them well, humanely, you're giving them proper time, they will take that much better. If you're talking about downsizing, laying people off, you don't wait until the last month or the last week and tell folks, hey, by the way, budget cannot, doesn't allow for your role next year. So thank you for your service. Have a great life. Right. That's probably the quickest way to a lawsuit.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
All right, everyone. My guest today is Kennedy Hilario, the CEO of ACE Charter Schools. Kennedy has held senior leadership roles in charter schools serving communities of color in California across Inglewood, Lawndale, East Los Angeles, and San Fernando Valley. In addition, he has also held leadership roles at 2 different charter schools in Massachusetts, where he helped grow a charter network from 1 to 3 schools and assisted in the management of the turnaround of a district school. Prior to working in education leadership, Kennedy worked for 12 years in the private sector. And as a lifelong learner, Kennedy has a BS in chemical engineering from the University of Florida, a BS in psychology from Biola University, a master's of education from Fielding Graduate University, and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Kennedy has also lived in Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, New York City, Miami, Houston, Chicago, Boston, Southern California, and currently resides in Berkeley, California, with his wife and children. In the episode today, Kennedy and I discuss values-based leadership and leadership principles in an ever-changing landscape. Hope you enjoy the episode. Kennedy, thanks so much for being here.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, super excited for our conversation today. And we're going to be talking about leadership. And I wanted to start with your reflections on when you hear the word leadership, what do you think of? What is a leader?
For me, a leader is someone who was able to take a group of people from point A to B. So if you have a challenge in front of you, how do you organize this group in order to achieve the goal or the mission successfully?
I want to talk about the mission because, as you mentioned, the ability to move a group from point A to point B takes a special set of skills. But to be able to do that grounded in a mission is critical to the success of educational organizations, really any organization. And so I'm curious, as a leader, how do you think about keeping your values and the mission at the forefront of getting your organization from point A to point B?
That's a great question, Daniel. So for me, I use the ACE mission and values to drive meetings and decisions. All my important decisions are driven by our mission and our values. So our mission and values are belief, responsibility, growth, and relationship. So we believe in our students. We are responsible for our students' successes and failures specifically. We believe in growing them. Our mission is to grow our students every day. And relationship is what we use to achieve our mission. So these 4 values are at the forefront of everything that we do. When we start our professional development or we have our network meetings, we always start them by reviewing the values. We use them to guide us in making tough decisions. For example, teacher and staff evaluations, we kind of measure the staff, how do they measure up against our core values? Does the teacher really believe in the student? Do they take responsibility for the student's success? Are they growing the students? Are they leveraging their relationship with the students in order to achieve that? how well are they using their relationship? And then in our hiring of staff, we always use our values to determine the fit between the person and the organization. So, and again, we use them to prioritize projects for the network and seeing which ones are important. So we always look at, are they important? Are they urgent? And if something is not important and not urgent, they don't get done. If it's not important and it's urgent, we delegate it.
I love the example of starting with your values when you gather as a staff and making sure that the mission and values are connected to the things that are happening day to day in the organization, all the way on up to, like you were referencing, strategic projects and evaluating whether or not they get done. The current landscape is always changing, right? And so as a leader, you have to remain adaptable. And I'm curious to hear how you think about keeping your team connected to the mission or keeping them motivated when things are changing and maybe things are challenging. Maybe there's pressures on the staff or there's changes going on inside the organization, outside the organization. Are there specific things that you've implemented as a leader to bring people back to the mission, to stay motivated? I'm curious how you keep people moving from point A to point B when things start to get challenging.
So I believe that all leaders should be teachers and mentors. So for me, I start every senior leadership staff meeting with a short professional development on management and leadership skills. Adults are always eager to learn new skills, and I think it's an exciting way to keep everybody aligned and just bring everybody when we start a new day, a new meeting. Just make sure everybody's on the same page, and that any worries or any concerns are checked outside of the meeting. I also track the energy in a meeting. I think as a good leader,
Hmm.
you need to have a high EQ. So I try to balance the energy of our meeting by going around the room and I get folks to talk about what has gone well in the week before we start talking about challenges. I always try to see things from the paradigm of the glass being half full. Every situation we discuss, there's always two sides to it. It's human nature to try to tend to be negative or try to look at, that glass half empty and how hard it's going to be to achieve something. And I always assume positive intentions. And I can't say that enough. Putting yourself in the shoes of the other person and seeing it from their point of view is key to changing your attitude and your perception and how the person is coming across or why they're doing certain things. Again, I look for ways to change that negative paradigm and to get people to imagine and see the possibilities. For example, when dealing with student discipline, I remind anyone around the room in the conversation to look at the challenges the students are facing at home, to think about what did they face that morning? Were they able to eat a nutritious meal? Did they have enough sleep? How did they
Hmm.
show up, at the school when they went through that threshold? And it always, the final thing I try to remind folks is that it's never personal. So you always have to look at folks are acting from their paradigm, but a lot of time they're not really even thinking of you. They're just reacting to what's going inside of them. I also try to lead by example and I balance thought leadership. So often I do take the lead in action planning and leading next to them side by side. So I don't expect them to come up with the solutions to hard problems alone. I bring my expertise, but at the same time, I also am very quick to set my expertise aside when I see that the team is wanting to go in a different direction, because it's always problems have many solutions and it's not the best solution that's the right solution. It's really the solution that the team feels most comfortable and agrees upon and has more confidence in. So I'm very careful to not allow my experience to, get in the way of the team functioning well and moving forward. And then I teach the hard stuff by doing it. I show that it can be done. So I never delegate the tough issues or decisions. I show them that we should not be afraid of the tough and that there's always a team backing them up. So you're never facing a situation alone.
Really good stuff in there. You talked about as leaders, you kind of talk through different components that you feel like you try and ingrain in your staff to keep them motivated when things are challenging. You also mentioned one of the realities of senior leadership is you're often dealing with students or staff who are in a reactive state. As you mentioned, there may be other things going on. People are reacting to different challenges that they've come across. As a staff and as a leader, it can probably, I would imagine, be tempting to be reactive to problems in your organization. The old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. How do you and your senior leadership team focus on top priorities and not spend all of that leadership energy on putting out fires?
That's a great question. So the way we start our meetings is that we create an agenda for each meeting. We then prioritize the items on the agenda based on the importance and then urgency. So, like I said initially, non-important items get scratched immediately or they get delegated, even if they're urgent. And then we go ahead and then allocate time to each of the items left on the agenda. We agreed up front, if we get sidetracked, any member can call it and place the item on the parking lot. And then we come back to it at the end of the meeting if there's time, or we just move it to another meeting. But we also try to handle miscellaneous items over email if they don't require face to face. And then we make sure that we reach decisions and we don't move from the item that we're discussing until the decision is made. Even if we run out of time for other items, we stay focused, even if it's just one key item. That's why it's so important to make sure that the most important item is at the front of your agenda and that only important items are included in your agenda. So for me, these items they need to be resolved face to face. That's a requirement for them to be in the agenda, and they have to be complex, sensitive issues. And we're just ruthless with time, and we only focus on the important matters first. We all been in meetings that you have 10 things to do, and then you only focus on one, and then you realize that you left the 9 that are really important off the
Right,
table.
sure.
So for me, that's the discipline that we follow, and it really works. The other thing is that we make sure that we do not have meetings that are very long. Some meetings, some folks go into like very long hours. And try to address every single issue. We make sure that our meetings are short. Sometimes, the most a meeting should be really, in my view, should be an hour and a half, an hour and a half maximum, because after that, what you find is that the people are exhausted, they're burnt out,
Hmm.
you're in a bad mood, and then the effectiveness of your meeting actually goes way down. The productivity of the meeting suffers.
I love this analogy of the parking lot. You mentioned, I don't know if it's actually on your priority list page, but you mentioned certain items get put in the parking lot to wait while other items are prioritized. Do you have this? I'm just curious. Do you have a number of cars that are allowed on the docket? Like you mentioned, really trying to be ruthless about elimination. Do you have a limit for the number of discussion topics in, say, an hour-long meeting?
Well, we do. I try to make it no more than, let's say, 4 items, but we really try to, we look at the list. There are times when they're like really short things that you can just kind of bust through them. So we may go more than that, but really a good meeting, we're really discussing 1 or 2 items, right? But when you go into 4, you're not really doing, if they're complex, sensitive issues, you're not really doing justice to them. So for me, I like to have 1 or 2 items, and then you walk away like from that meeting, like you really achieved, you made progress, you move forward, you have concrete action steps that the team is going to take. Everybody's on the same page. So then there's no surprise. There's no like, oh, I didn't really understand that. I thought this, I thought that. So for me, it's important to just focus on 1 to 2. But again, once in a while, we go to 3 or 4.
Sure, sure. Well, it sounds like you're very intentional about creating a culture that quickly addresses issues that are complex and sensitive. You used that description a couple times when you were talking through what ends up getting prioritized. And I think that gets to this idea of creating a really stable organization. And at the top of our conversation, you mentioned, a leader is able to take an organization from point A to point B. Are there other things that come to mind when you think about creating a culture of long-term stability within your organization, or other things maybe that I guess the reverse of that question would be, are there things that you try to avoid or quickly stamp out that lead to instability amongst an organization?
Great question. Instability, things that can lead to instability in an organization is having a culture of negativity, a culture where there's a lot of gossip going around, a culture where it's always, there's a B, C conversation, and A is always talking about, what they heard C say. So for me, that I try to be an organization that is transparent. Transparency is number one. It's in a transparent organization, there is no room for lack of clarity, for rumors, for gossip. So a- answering the first part of the question in terms of like, how do you set positive, healthy long-term culture, I think it's just having clear priorities up front. So we have clear priorities every year. We decide on what are going to be our top 3 to 4 priorities, usually top 3 priorities for the year, and we reinforce that in every major project and any investment of human energy. We're making sure that they relate to those priorities. If we're going to start a project that doesn't relate to those priorities and it's going to take a lot of time and investment of resources, we just simply don't do it. We're very disciplined. We have cultural norms and that always put people first. We create a culture where most issues are solved in collaboration and people are listened to before starting to articulate a solution to the problem. So when I meet with the staff, I am listening intently to everyone, even the folks that may be disagreeable. And I try to find common ground with those people first so that they really see that I'm trying to understand all points of view and that there are no bad points of views. And then, again, having all the stakeholders input is key. And we don't do top down management. We don't sit in a room where the administrators or the senior leaders, and then we come up with a solution. And then we just kind of shoot that off via an email to the school leader, right?
Right,
And say,
right.
let's go and tell the teacher. That is absolutely the worst form of management. It's probably the simplest, and people under this time crunch think that that's the most efficient way. And if you practice that, and I've seen some folks do that, it really backfires in a big way because all of a sudden they find out like, oh my gosh, that's not what I meant to say. No, that's not what I said. Or why are you taking it this way? Right? Like everything that could have been solved with face to face, listening first and talking second. We have a culture where important conversations again are done in person. And the
Mm,
goal of that is to build a relationship before you tackle the problem. As the old adage of people don't really care what you know until they know how much you care it's always true. Especially when you're in a high intensive, pressure cooking kind of atmosphere, which is teaching. There's always more to do than can be done. There's people coming at you every single way. There's always the students, the teachers, the parents, the district, and you have to really take time and make time for those important conversations face to face and build those relationships. And I like to have a culture, create a culture that trusts people, trust that people know best and what's good for them and how they should manage their own time, their work time. I allow folks to work from home or take care of personal matters without feeling guilty. I don't ask you what kind of personal time are you taking. It's a PTO, it's a sick time. If you need the time off, you take it, you use whatever you need to do. I much rather you take an extra day that I don't even know about and for you to come fresh than for me to be making sure, oh, you only took, making sure you took 3.5 sick days or
right, right.
5.2, PTO. So again, managing based on outcome and not on face time put at work. I'd rather you work 4 hours and give me high quality work than to put 10 hours in the office and not get the work done or do poor quality work.
Totally. You talk a lot about putting people first and the emphasis on relationships and how relationships drive ultimately the success of the organization. And one of the things that you mentioned, which I love this rule, this idea of having conversations face to face, particularly if you're dealing with a complex challenge. Now, there's a lot of pressures every academic year, but just to name a few in, the current academic year and maybe upcoming academic year, depending on where you are in the country, decreasing populations and therefore decreasing enrollment, teacher shortage or lack of teacher retention has been challenging in a lot of areas. You've got kind of one-time funds that are running out that were appropriated during COVID. And so in the midst of all of that, that produces complex problems that need to be solved. And how do you think about having hard conversations with staff when maybe priorities are getting derailed by external factors or pressures on the organizations? Are there any consistent recommendations you make to your leadership team or any things that you've noticed allow those hard conversations to be had without demotivating the staff and creating that negative environment? Because you mentioned that's one of the things that can quickly lead to instability. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Sure. So I think in order to make difficult decisions and manage through a constantly changing environment and maintain a positive culture, again, the key thing is to be a transparent culture, transparency, honesty. No matter how hard of a conversation you're going to have with someone, if they feel you're being honest with them, if they feel you treated them well, humanely, you've given them proper time, they will take that much better. If you're talking about downsizing, laying people off, you don't wait until the last month or the last week and tell folks, hey, by the way, budget cannot, doesn't allow for your role next year. So thank you for your service. Have a great life. Right.
Right.
That's probably the quickest way to a lawsuit
Yeah.
that you're going to find yourself. So what we do is that we really are, that's why having priorities at the beginning of the year is so key. You know what your organization is going to focus on. You know what the tough choices are going to be. And so then you already have a vision from getting from A to B, and your role this time, your role as a leader is to use this time, these 10 months in the school year to create this bridge to get folks from here to here in a healthy way, right? So it's a tough choice. We're going to have to downsize. Like last year, I had to downsize 29 people in the organization. We
Wow.
knew that at the very beginning. We read the tea leaves. They all said, uh-oh, right? So what we did is whenever a position became vacant, we just didn't fill it. So we really didn't downsize 29 folks. We ended up really downsizing like 7 people because most of the positions, kind of vacated themselves. People were looking for opportunity, or opportunities came to them and we encouraged them to take those opportunities, and we didn't backfill. So we would have a conversation with the principal saying, we can't backfill that position now because we're going to have to let them go at the end of the year. And so that resulted in a really smooth transition, believe it or not. Folks were really freaked out at the beginning thinking, my gosh, 29, what is that going to look like? How is that going to happen? At the end of that school year, it went well. We had gone through that mountain and come out on the other end, actually not as bad as we thought it was going to be. And so that's a good leader because you take advantage of the time, you have a clear vision, and then you just have those honest, clear conversations. And the other thing, I don't make it personal. We should never make any decision personal. If you do, that's bad leadership. You create a strategic plan at the very beginning, you get input from the entire organization, and then you list the issues and the priorities, and you use consensus so that people can feel that they bought into. So they see the hard choices, and you're saying, help me organize it, help me prioritize it, help me come up with a solution. So it's not you giving them your solution, right? So they're buying into it as well. And you look for solutions that put students and teachers first in terms of financial investment and time allocation. I always say the students are the client, right? But the teachers are the rock stars because they're the ones in the front line serving the students. So all resources go to them first. So if there's sacrifice to be made, it starts at the central office.
Mm.
We cut personnel and staff at the central office and the administrative level, and we try to provide as much support, again, to the people doing the direct services. And it's easier to ask people to make a tough choice if you're making those bigger sacrifices. So for example, if I'm asking the principal, the school leader to cut $100,000 from their budget and they're going, oh my gosh, I have to choose between these folks that I really need for the student. What I'm doing is saying, look, we at the central office are going to cut $400,000. So we're going to show you that we're going to get a lot shorter because we're going to take the biggest hit so that we can protect you. But we're going to share that hit. We're going to share the load, and I'm going to take the burden of that load. And I think doing that is what really gets people to respect you and to understand and to realize, okay, they're putting the student first. They're putting the teacher first. This is what has to be done. I'm going to support that.
Well, as we kind of come to a close here, I want to talk just a little bit about recommendations for other leaders who find themselves maybe in a reactive mode, going from one challenge to the next challenge. You've talked a lot about really letting the values and the mission of the organization drive your leadership decisions and trying to create a culture of transparency, a culture where people are bought into the arc that you sort of described of getting from point A to point B. Where would you recommend other leaders think about starting if they find themselves in kind of a reactive mode where there is a little bit of instability in the organization and they're wrestling with, one challenge after the next? What would you recommend leaders think about doing as kind of a reset, or where should they start if they want to get back to letting the values and the mission of the organization drive leadership decisions?
So I'm going to answer that in a little bit of an indirect way. So
Okay.
instead of the school leader, I think the school leader should realize that they're not alone
Mm.
and that it needs to be done in tandem with the central office, right? So I believe as the central office, the senior leaders are always meeting with the school leaders on a weekly basis. And I believe that the school leaders should be seeking consistent support and guidance and realizing that they're not alone. So on a weekly basis, we are looking at the issues that they're facing because they are changing constantly, and making sure that the decisions are driven by agreed upon organizational priorities. So you have that consistency because it's easy for the school leader to be in an island. And that's one of the things I've seen often is that they start doing things on their own, and in their own universe, it all makes sense, but it's totally disconnected from the network. And all of a sudden you have now all these different leaders going in different directions. So staying connected to the mothership, and it's not, and really is the senior, the central office has the responsibility to make sure that they're meeting the school leader, because the school leader is very busy dealing with things coming their, 100 things coming their way every single day. So it is incumbent upon the central office to have those meetings, make sure that they're respectful of the time, that they're flexible with the time. And sometimes you need to cancel a meeting, that's fine. But always making sure that you're making decisions together, that you're staying connected, and making sure that these decisions are being driven by organizational priorities. So in those meetings, what do we offer? We offer the school leader strategy sessions. We offer action planning. We offer understanding. And we offer them a balanced view, making sure that all the voices are being heard, that they're not being biased towards just one stakeholder, that the student is being heard, the parent, the teacher, the district, and any other party. It's really easy for you to say, I don't understand, this is what I would do. But then the central office has to say, okay, let's look at it from this other point of view. Let's make sure. So this parent is upset with the school and they've complained to the district, and sure, maybe they didn't do it the right way. They didn't give you the chance, but let's look at it and understand that this mom or dad is really concerned about their child. And this is the most precious thing in their world, in their universe. And so they're going to do everything they can to protect it. So they come in from a point of fear, a point of protection, a point of love. And all of a sudden, when you switch that paradigm, it allows the school leader to rebalance themselves and say, okay, so now that I understand that a little better, let me move forward. And again, we encourage all decisions to be student-centered. We preach and practice an inverted pyramid. So the central office and administrators are there to support the students, and the teachers who are the rock stars. All decisions are filtered through our 4 agreed upon organizational values, which are belief, responsibility, growth, and relationship. So we always go back to those values.
Awesome. Well, Kennedy, I really appreciate you doing this and offering your advice and your thoughts on leadership as you've learned over the years and navigated leading different organizations. Are there any final recommendations for resources that you've found particularly helpful as you think about your own professional development? I know you lead PD for your staff when you bring your senior staff together, but any additional resources you might recommend for folks who might be listening to this?
I'm always searching for resources. So I love LinkedIn. There's a lot of, you can subscribe and there's a lot of courses that you can go through there. I'm always looking for new books on leadership and education. Blinkist is an app where I get a lot of summary of new books. So I also do professional development for my parents. So I look for books on parenting, and, the other sources I stay connected is the Charter School Development Center. They offer some really good leadership classes in a year. They offer chief business officer training. They offer new leader training. They're typically a week long, and they're great because they introduce you to a network of new leaders. So they expand your network. They're exposing you to experts. So you're learning new strategies that have proven through time. I also like to go to Charter School Association, their conferences, the annual conferences. I like to look up who's attending. And so before I attend, I actually set meetings with specific people. So if I'm having a problem with enrollment or in compliance or credentialing, I'm looking for those sessions that are talking about that. And you'll be surprised how helpful people are, because I will contact those. A lot of times they're like really senior people in the, educational, state department, and they'll meet with you because they're going to be there. And if you meet with them before or after, they'll be more than happy. And so it's a way to get hundreds of dollars of consulting worth, advice for free.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, those are some of the resources that I try to use.
Great. Well, we'll link to some of those resources in the show notes, and I think some of those are really good recommendations. And CSTC, I think, has their conference coming up in November, I believe.
November.
Yeah. So are you going to be at that?
I will be there. Yes. Absolutely.
All right. Great. Well, if you're listening to this, you can be that person that takes Kennedy's advice, reaches out to him ahead of the conference, and asks for time. So
Would
with
love
that,
that.
with that, we'll call it a wrap. Kennedy, thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@byq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.